Hello and welcome to the Bible Standard. In this video we explore a profound connection between the order of creation in Genesis chapter 1 and the chaos of the 10 plagues in Exodus. This presentation reveals how God systematically reversed his own creative work to deliver his people from Egypt, demonstrating the incredible lengths to which he will go to for our salvation. We delve into the Hebrew meaning of without form and void, and its link to the scientific concept of entropy, offering an outstanding expositional look at the foundations of our universe and God's power over it. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and drop us a comment to have your say. We love to hear your thoughts.
When we look at the great chapter on creation, Genesis chapter 1, we learn a number of fundamental concepts that are there just below the surface, and which we have only begun to understand during the last 100 years or so. For example, we read in verse 2, the earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. And I don't think the translation here really does justice to what we are being told. After all, what does it mean? And how do we understand or visualize this idea of without form and void? And I'd put it to you that when we read this verse, we maybe view it as just nothing really there, and we read on. But what is God telling us here? The Hebrew words here are tohu, waBohu. And if we go to Strong's and we look up Strong's 8414, this Hebrew word tohu, which means, or has been translated here for us as without form, we find that it means also formlessness, confusion, emptiness, wasteland, wilderness, chaos. And likewise for that other Hebrew word, bohu, which is Strong's number 922, translated for us as void, we read there it also means emptiness, void, or waste. So this tohu waBohu is describing to us a state where the earth is a formless emptiness, a kind of empty chaos. There is no meaningful design or structure or plan evident. In fact, even worse, it's not just formless emptiness, but empty chaos or disorder. And it is that word or concept that we unfortunately have, I think, lost in the English translation. You see, chaos is at the very concept of entropy. And if we look up what entropy means, we find that it is a scientific concept, most commonly associated with states of disorder, randomness, or uncertainty. It is the amount of order or lack of order in a system, or it is the gradual decline into disorder. In fact, the second law of thermodynamics says that in a closed system, so nothing is able to influence what happens inside that system, entropy always increases over time. In this example, in this box, we might have a solid cube of ice melting to a liquid and then in turn evaporating into the air in, say, a room or box, leading to states of greater disorder over time as this water vapor mixes through the air in that room or box. Another example of entropy is taking some cream and putting it into your coffee or tea. The two will mix spontaneously. The cream and the coffee molecules have moved from a state in which they were separated to a mixed state of greater disorder. And as a result of entropy, it won't suddenly revert back to the way it was, ever. So one of the key implications that jumps out of this second law of thermodynamics is that time is almost a consequence of entropy. As this process of entropy, this disorder that we experience or observe takes place, we feel it as time. So time is a kind of byproduct of how we perceive change brought about by entropy in our environment. And so what scientists have discovered is that while we experience the passage of time, We know of things that happened yesterday. We plan for things we hope will happen tomorrow. And we experience the present here and now. However, time itself is not built into the universe at a fundamental level. In other words, we don't find time in the fundamental equations that describe the reality of our universe. And so while we see the hands of a clock ticking, time is merely a way we have come up with to measure change that is taking place around us, change brought about by entropy. And time, we know, changes and is different between two frames of reference if they are traveling at substantially different speeds relative to each other. So just in that part, time is not a constant. So what I think we are reading in Genesis chapter 1 is when God created the heavens and the earth in verse 1, the state of things at that point was one of disorder, one of chaos or entropy. And it is only when God started creating order into that state of affairs that time would, in a sense, come into existence and start ticking for, say, us experiencing it. Showing us once again that God lives outside of time. He created time. He is not bound by time or subject to it. And that is why he knows the end from the beginning. And I think it's the very essence of what immortality is, which God says he alone has. We read in 1 Timothy chapter 6 and over the verses 13 to 16, I charge you, Paul says, in the presence of God who gives life to all things, and then down to verse 16, who alone has immortality. There's no one else who had immortality other than God, and he offers it to us, just as he has given it to Jesus. So this verse 2, here back in Genesis chapter 1, is an incredible verse, ununderstood at this level for thousands of years, but proving once again that the Bible was not written by mere man. Now, when we come to look at the account of Moses' interaction with Pharaoh as he looks to get God's people released from bondage in Egypt, we find that God sends or inflicts Egypt with 10 plagues. And we come across these 10 plagues from Exodus chapter 7, verse 14, all the way through to Exodus chapter 12 and verse 32. And have you ever thought about or wondered why 10 plagues? Why did God not send 2 or 8 or maybe even 6 to say represent the number of man? Why 10? We know God doesn't do anything without a reason. Furthermore, the more we look into God's reasons for doing things, we discover that he does so in order to teach us some further fundamental lessons. So we need to delve into this issue if we are to learn not only God's rationale behind sending 10 plagues, but also what is he trying to teach us. And as always, Luke reminds us in Acts chapter 17 of why we should be compelled to do this. In verse 11 of Acts 17 we read, now these Jews were more noble than those in Thessalonica. Why were they more noble? We carry on. They received the word with all eagerness, examining the scriptures daily to see if these things were so. And the King James Version says they searched the scriptures daily, examined or searched. And we notice they did it eagerly, joyfully, not once a week or every so often, but daily, every single day. They searched with eagerness, with joy, the scriptures. Now, as we usually find, the key to most things lies in Genesis. And so if you have your Bible handy, open it up to Genesis chapter 1 and let us start our examining or searching together. Now this again maybe be something you've come across before, but for those who haven't, we find in God's creative work from verse 3 to verse 31 of Genesis 1 that he performs his creative work by that which is unique to him and to us. No other creature except man has been given this particular attribute or ability. and it is the ability to speak. And so we see in verse 3 this phrase, "and God said." And so what we notice in verses 3 to 31 is that every time God creates something, he does so by using this phrase. And just take a guess at how many times this phrase occurs in this opening chapter, and hence how many creative acts there are. And the answer, if you knew it already or counted quickly, is 10. And so we straight away have a very strong link to our 10 plagues. 10 creative acts by God and 10 plagues also by God. So let's start by looking at what God created in these 10 acts of creation. And bear in mind the underlying theme of God's creative acts as we go through them is that he is bringing order and structure out of chaos. He is reversing that state of entropy that we read about in verse 2. So let's look at each of these 10 acts of creation by God and see exactly what he created in each instance. And these are the 10 verses where they occur from verses 3 through to verse 29. Now, when we look at each act of creation, what we want to do is to try to crystallize into ideally a single word or two what in essence it is that God has created. So starting with verse 3 and our first occurrence of "and God said," what has God created here? And so in verse 3 of Genesis 1 we read, "And God said, let there be light. And there was light." So clearly what God has created here in verse 3 is light. We move on to our second one, verse 6, and here we read, "And God said, let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." Again, what has God created here? Water. Moving to our third one, verse 9, we read, "And God said, let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear." Again, God has created here dry land. Our fourth one, verse 11, we read, "And God said, let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees bearing fruit, in which is their seed, and each according to its kind on the earth." And so here God has created vegetation. Our fifth one, verse 14, we read, "And God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night." What is God creating here? In essence, night. Verse 20, our sixth one, we read, "And God said, let the waters swarm with swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth." What has God created? He's created sea or water creatures as well as birds which inhabit the air. Our seventh one, verse 24, we read, "And God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures according to their kinds, livestock and creeping things and beasts of the earth according to their kind." What has God created? He has created here land creatures, whatever they might be, those that live on the land, distinct from those water creatures and birds that inhabit the air. Our eighth one, verse 26, we read, "Then God said, let us make man in our image after our likeness." What has God created? Man, us. Ninth one, verse 28, we read, "And God said, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth." What has God done here? He is making man to be fruitful and have dominion over his environment. Everything that lives on the earth and all those creatures that live in the air and in the sea and in the waters. And in our last one, verse 29, we read, "And God said, behold, I've given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of all the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food." What has God created here? He has created food for us. Now, bearing in mind what God created each time, can we provide a purpose behind why God made each creation? What is the purpose or reason behind what God created? And obviously, when we're looking at this, we are central to these reasons. So our first one in creating light, the purpose is so that we can see by removing the darkness. You can't see unless you have light. By creating water, so we can drink, so we can wash, and so we can be clean. By creating dry land, so we have a place to live on, to be able to build places to stay in, to be able to grow crops, etc. Creating vegetation, so we can grow food to eat ourselves and also to feed our animals. Creating night, so we can rest and have peace and quiet and recharge our batteries. Creating sea, water creatures and birds, well, partly for food, but also to provide a balance to nature. You can't just have creatures on the earth and nothing in the waters or in the air. You need that balance in nature. Creating land creatures, again for food and for functional labor. In other words, to be able to be used to plow fields, to pull carts, etc. Creating man, so we can live and fulfill our purpose, which is to worship God. Creating man to be fruitful and have dominion, so we can enjoy life and multiply and have families and communities. And in creating food to sustain us so that we can live. So having then looked into God's 10 creative acts and the purpose behind each, let us go and look at our 10 plagues now in Egypt. And again here we're going to look at the verses dealing with each plague and try to summarize into 2 or 3 words what that plague was about. In other words, what did God do or what happened as a consequence of that plague? So the first plague we come across, plague 1 in Exodus chapter 7 and verses 14 to 25. And we read here, Moses and Aaron did as the Lord commanded. In the sight of Pharaoh and in the sight of his servants, he lifted up the staff and he struck the water in the Nile, and all the water in the Nile turned into blood. And the fish in the Nile died, and the Nile stank, so that the Egyptians could not drink water from the Nile. What in essence did God do? He turned water into blood, so that they had nothing to drink. All that water turned into blood, the fish dying. Can you imagine the stench throughout the land? It must have been horrific. Plague 2. Read about it in Exodus chapter 8 and verses 1 to 15. And the Lord said to Moses, say to Aaron, stretch out your hand with your staff over the rivers, over the canals and over the pools, and make frogs come up on the land of Egypt. So Aaron stretched out his hand over the waters of Egypt, and the frogs came up and covered the land of Egypt. What did God do here? He made an army of frogs that live in the waters, come out onto the land and infest the land, move into an area that was not their natural habitat. Plague 3. Verses 16 to 19 of Exodus 8, Aaron stretched out his hand with his staff and struck the dust of the earth, and there were gnats on man and beast. All the dust of the earth became gnats in all the land of Egypt. What did God do? He took the dust or soil of the ground and he turned it into gnats or lice to infest the people. Our 4th plague, verses 20 to 24 of Exodus 8, I will send swarms of flies on you and your servants and your people and into your houses, and the houses of the Egyptians shall be filled with swarms of flies, and also the ground on which they stand. What did God do? He sent swarms of flies into their houses, into their kitchens, there where they would have kept and prepared their food. They would have infested all their food with germs and maggots, making it inedible, making it stink and stench again. Plague 5, Exodus 9 verses 1 to 7. All the livestock of the Egyptians died. What did God do? He killed all their animals, horses, cows, sheep, goats, everything. Again, can you just imagine the stench from all of this throughout the land? Plague 6, Exodus 9 verse 8 to 12. So they took soot from the kiln and stood before Pharaoh, and Moses threw it in the air, and it became boils, breaking out in sores on man and beast. What did God do? He caused boils and sores to break out on the people and their animals, making them itch and scratch and be in pain and highly, highly uncomfortable. Our seventh plague, verse 13 to 35 of Exodus 9. Then Moses stretched out his staff towards heaven, and the Lord sent thunder and hail and fire ran down to the earth. What did God do? He caused a ferocious, violent storm with hail and lightning and thunder. This would have been no ordinary thunderstorm. We've probably all been in a bad storm, but this would have been one on steroids. The noise and violence would have been absolutely horrendous. And it must have gone on and on and on, hours, days, no let up. Plague 8, Exodus 10, verse 1 to 20. The locusts came up over all the land of Egypt and settled on the whole country of Egypt, such a dense swarm of locusts as has never been before, nor ever will be again. They covered the face of the whole land so that the land was darkened, and they ate all the plants in the land and all the fruit of the trees that the hail had left. Not a green thing remained, neither tree nor plant of the field, through all the land of Egypt. What did God do? He sent millions upon millions of locusts to invade the land and eat every single plant that they could find. We've probably seen pictures or video clips of these locust swarms that come out of the deserts and eat everything in sight. Can you just imagine this one? There would have been absolutely nothing left. Nothing. Plague 9, Exodus 10, verse 21 to 23. So Moses stretched out his hand toward heaven, and there was pitch darkness in all the land of Egypt 3 days. What did God do? He removed the light of the sun, so the whole land was covered in pitch darkness for 3 days. And while in those days they may have had oil lamps for some light at night, it's highly unlikely that they had enough to get through 3 days, day and night. And so they would eventually all have had to consign themselves to total darkness, pitch darkness. Without modern electricity for lights, you can't move, you're stuck, you're blinded. And in our last plague, plague 10, Exodus 12, verse 29 to 30, at midnight, the Lord struck down all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on his throne to the firstborn of the captive who was in the dungeons, and all the firstborn of the livestock. What did God do? He killed every firstborn, humans and animals. Not only was a life taken, but it was the firstborn, the one that represents the continuation of your line, the start of your family, your lineage. So having then looked at God's 10 creative acts in Genesis, and not only what he created, but the purpose behind each creation, let us now look at these together with a look at the 10 plagues that God inflicted upon Egypt. And so what we're going to do is to try and match these in reverse, so to speak, as God undoes his creative acts in these plagues. And if we use the purpose behind each creative act, we should be able to match it with a corresponding plague as we see God reversing that purpose. And you'll have noticed that I've reordered some of the creative acts so that we can tackle the easiest and more obvious ones first. So light, starting off, God created light, and the purpose was for us to see, to remove darkness. And very easily we can see the reversal of this in the 9th plague, where God brings darkness over the land. He removes the light he created and returns it to darkness. Secondly, waters. Here God created water for us to drink and to wash in. With the first plague, turning all the water into blood, God is reversing or removing the benefit of water to man. He no longer has anything to drink or to wash with. Next we have vegetation. God created vegetation for food for us and our animals. But in the 8th plague, this is devoured in its entirety by the locust. Nothing would have been left. Next we had land creatures. God creates the animals on the land for us to eat and to use. But with the 5th plague, all of those animals die. And again, can you just imagine the rotting stench that would have arisen from all of these animal carcasses? Then we have man. We, man, have been created to live and worship our Creator. We can't do that if we are dead. And so in the 10th plague, we find the death of the firstborn. And with it, in a way, the death of the continuation of our bloodline and our family. In the sea and water creatures and birds, God creates these sea or water creatures, these birds of the air, both for food and also for a sustainable balance in nature. And so here in the 2nd plague, we see these water creatures represented by frogs coming out of their natural habitat and invading and inundating where man lives. In essence, unbalancing the natural way God set things up in His creation. Then we have God creating dry land for us to live on, to build on, and to farm. Yet here in the 3rd plague, God uses the very soil, the dust of the earth, and turns it from something useful into gnats or lice to infest man and torment him. When we come to night, God created us to require sleep and quiet time to rest and rejuvenate ourselves. And we do so at night. Just try and go a long time without sleep, and you will very quickly see how damaging it is to your well-being and health. We desperately need that rest. That is the way we have been made. But here in the 7th plague, God sends hail, thunder, and fire to take away the rest and the peace and the quiet, taking away the benefit of the night, taking away the ability for them to be able to sleep peacefully. Then we have man. God creating him to be fruitful and have dominion. God created man to enjoy life, to be fruitful, have offspring and a family and a community, and to have dominion and control over his environment, to be able to create things and shape what is around us to provide visual and functional, comfortable benefits. But in the 6th plague, God inflicts boils on both man and his animals and takes away any chance he has of leading an enjoyable, comfortable life. Instead, it is one of pain, suffering, being uncomfortable, scratching at sores and boils. And then lastly, we have food. God gave us food to enjoy, to sustain us, and to live. And here in the 4th plague, God sends flies who would infest and infect all man's food with germs and maggots and disease. Now that we have matched all of them, we can shuffle them and we end up with something like this table. And if you scan through this list, you will easily see how in each specific creative act, God is reversing the very purpose behind it by undoing these creative acts from Genesis in each plague. But why? As we said in the beginning, God doesn't do anything without a reason, and we know that that reason is invariably in order to teach us some fundamental lesson. Now, God does give a reason to Pharaoh in Exodus chapter 9 and verse 16, and God says here, "For this purpose I've raised you up to show you my power, so that my name might be proclaimed in all the earth." But if that's all there was to it, it would have very little relevance to us today, nearly 3,500 years later. Make no mistake, Pharaoh and the surrounding nations were made to be well aware of God's power. So what is it that God is telling us and trying to teach us in these 10 plagues? I think God is saying that He will do anything, including unraveling the very foundations of creation in order to save His people. God is saying that there is no limit to how much I love you and how far I will go to save you. And so the only thing that can ever stand in the way of our salvation is our unbelief. This is, after all, what blasphemy of the Holy Spirit is, denying that God has the power to forgive us and save us. If we do not believe that God is able to forgive us and save us, He can't. And if this demonstration of God's power does not convince us, then nothing will, not even if someone should rise from the dead.
Drop a comment in the comment section and let us know what you thought. And make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. Please share it and spread the word. Thanks for watching, and remember to come back soon.